Lord Dear, thank you for those kind words. It's always a bit difficult when you hear that sort of thing. It's a bit like hearing the announcement of your death. You run through your life, but it was kind of you to offer those words, and I do appreciate it. I was also a little bit worried when you sort of went through sort of the rapidity of change around commissioners. You're about to announce my own departure, but anyway, hopefully not for another 24 hours. But you never know. You never know. Although I have said that I'd like to remain in the job for about 7 years. I don't mean to say it's entirely down to me. I'm sure there'll be other people who form their own view and they might like to get rid of me now. But I think for the reasons that Lord Dear sketched out, then the organisation needs some stability, but not to be confused with inertia, because I'll sketch out obviously some of the challenges we face, but also some of the things that we're about to do about that, because we still do need radical change, even at a time when we're trying to achieve that level of stability, which is obviously quite a challenging time for everybody in public service, but also in commerce, as I know represented here today. I was talking to Simon Cole just before I came in, and Simon said, I think we're probably going to hear about total policing, but I'm not going to talk an awful lot about that. I will only say briefly is that we have an ambition to be the best. That's what we're going to be. I don't accept the argument that Metropolitan Police has to be 43rd out of 43 forces in terms of league tables. There are challenges in police in this great city, but there's no excuse for not trying, and that's what we're embarking on. We've already seen some progress, but there's far more to do. Total policing only about having a war on crime, being unequivocal about the fact that we're there to stop crime, arrest criminals or help victims. The second part is to have a total care for victims and to be totally professional in the process. As was said, we did manage to achieve some things in Merseyside, of which I am proud, not of what my achievements were, but what the organisations and our partners' achievements were. But I was proudest of one thing, which was despite the fact that we, as well as decreasing the amount of crime, as well as taking savings out of the back office and getting more police officers on the street by about 9%, nearly 10% more police officers by the time I left, we changed the profile of complaints from being the worst in the country per officer to being the best. So it wasn't just what we did, it was the way we did it. For me, it's vital that we get that balance right, because I know one of the things you've been talking about today is legitimacy. And it really does matter how we work with the public, and of course the very topic I'm about to talk about is about community engagement. So for me it is a vital underpinning of what we do. It's not just what we say in terms of tactics, it's how we work with the 8.1 million people in London to deliver a great service. But first of all, thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I do appreciate it, because I know that you've had many speakers during the day and other people could have filled this slot. But I thought I'd just set out first of all the vision that we've set out, which is about keeping the people in London safe from criminals and those who use violence or create trouble. And I use it in those terms because, of course, antisocial behaviour may include neither of the first two. Crime has many aspects. Antisocial behaviour is ill-defined. But it's important that we make sure that we regard it as priority. We think we do this best by cutting crime, catching criminals, and being where people need us. So that means about being in the right place at the right time and in strength. We may come on in questions to talk about the riots of last year, but one of the difficulties at the time was whatever the causes of the disorder, we didn't have enough people in the right place to make sure that we stopped something that was disorder turning into riot. And we all saw the consequences over the following 3 days. And of course we can't do that alone. We're here today to talk about community engagement. We have about 50,000 people. It's around now 32,000 police. There's no way that that number of people can impose their will on 8.1 million people. It has to be done with consent, and it has to be done because we're doing the things that they regard as priorities. I know that you've heard this morning, I think Ian Load has spoken about why community engagement matters. We know that community engagement is a key driver for community confidence, and that's something that both the Deputy Mayor has set as a target, and I want to make sure that we improve too, because policing with consent is at the heart of British policing. We'll only achieve that aim, being the best police service, if we get community engagement right with all of our London residents and our visitors. However, the current landscape is changing, which means that the police must change to keep up with the times. I'll talk perhaps a little later, but already we know that the profile of London is massively different to what it was 10 years ago. We look at the census and we see that it's risen from about a population of about 7.4 million people in 10 years to now 8.1 million people. A disproportionate number of growth of the people in this country has arrived in London. And that's because they're attracted by the great city it is, and it's because they're attracted by the great commerce that exists here too. We see differential birth rates in London in the east of the city compared to the rest of the city. One of the things we know is that the growth of the number of young men in society can change the profile of crime. And that's something that we really have to be aware of. London is changing because it's been extruded to the east. We've seen the Thames Gateway moving business and commerce out into the county of Kent, but of course the people, the community are all changing out over in that eastern area. We know that in some of the boroughs of London we see people living in buildings for which there's no planning permission. In the borough of Newham, 25,000 people living in some of these buildings built onto the back of garages and homes. Not 200, 25,000 people in one borough. 4 or 5 other boroughs similarly affected. And the pace of that change has been massive in a short period of time. It's not the fact that, societies have always changed. If you looked at some of the boroughs in North London, Hackney, migration has often travelled through Hackney as people have, circumstances have improved, they moved into different parts of London, different parts of the country. So it's always been the case that the big cities of this world have always seen this sort of change. But we are seeing a rapid change brought about by mass migration that's happened for various reasons in the last 10 years. I've already said that we have the 8.2 million people in London. Now we also have another 1.1 million daily commuters. We have the changing demographics I've already mentioned, and this growing population that is changing at a different rate compared to what we see sometimes in the rest of the country. So it does go without saying that the challenge of crime also never stops changing, because of course those different communities have different needs and different criminal opportunities to present themselves. I'm not of the mind that thinks that people have got more criminal over the years. I'm not sure we are more criminal than Victorian times. I can be sure that in fact opportunities for crime have changed. 1 in 3 crimes affects a car, a vehicle. And of course 100 years ago they weren't there. They certainly weren't there in the volume they are now, and someone didn't park them on the street. So we do see more car crime. Because if you see more cars parked on the street, they're available to be stolen, attacked and be stolen from. It's a different profile of crime. Are there more criminals? I'm not so sure there are. But there's certainly more car crime. And it seems to me we've got to keep an eye on that sort of thing as society changes. One, because we shouldn't frighten ourselves, and secondly because we have to analyse and deal with the crime as it changes too. So we need to be smarter, faster and more accessible. And that seems to be particularly relevant when we're talking about community engagement. We need to find new ways to give Londoners the service that they deserve. We have got budgetary constraints. We've got to find about £500 million in the years 2013 through to 15. Our budget is about £3.5 billion. But whichever way we cut it, it's a lot of money. £500 million is a very significant amount. Now, compared to the other forces in the country, the other 41 forces out of 42, they've started this process already, to be fair. We had protection during the Olympic years, or year. But in our preparations for and then delivery of the Olympics, we were protected in terms of our budget. But we have to start this process now. And following all the strategic changes being in leadership, we are still trying to get this settled view, this settled strategy about what we should do in the future. So therefore, what are we going to do? Well, our response has been something that we called Met Change. It's about the budgetary challenges we face, but more importantly, it's about saying in the next 3 to 5 years, where do we want to be? What do we want to deliver? And by the way, we've got to find £500 million of savings. Because to do it in the reverse way seems to me to be you can salami slice your way towards any future. But if we have a clear vision of what we want to be, then we've got a better chance of achieving it in a progressive and in an organised way, which I hope that the community can support. And I also do think it is an opportunity to better connect with the public that we serve. So, for example, we are going to announce details by Christmas of how we introduce a new local policing model through which we will see 2,000 more police officers in the neighbourhood policing by Christmas. That is possible, even though we're going to spend less money, it will still be possible. And there are 2 ways that we'll do it. One is to remove officers from tasks which we think are less important than patrolling the streets. And the other one is we will have less managers. We think actually, as a result of saving all the money that we're saving, we'll end up with a historical high number of constables, even if we have less people. We've got about 50,000 people. 10,000 of those are classed as supervisors or managers. So a ratio of about 1 in 5. That's a very high ratio if you look at the police services around this country. Well, there's something we can do something there to save the money that we're applying. If there are risks to be taken about management, then we'll take them. But most importantly, we get the people who do the job out there and available for the public. So we think that we'll get our police constable numbers to well over 25,500, even if we overall end up having less people. We think the public can support that. That will happen over the next few years, but the initial start is to put an extra 2,000 out from the back offices where we see them. In the local policing model, we don't want to see our officers sitting in unwelcoming police stations, filling in forms or wasting time in meetings. So we're moving out from behind the counter, putting our money and our people where they cut crime, on the street and in our neighbourhoods. We have some crime investigation bureaus. You see them right around the country. I would argue they're a misnomer. They don't investigate crime. They record it, and they can produce records that tell you how many burglaries there were yesterday. It'd be really nice if we could intervene and stop it, or arrest the person who did it. So for me, of course, there is a need to record things appropriately. And over time, we've been driven to answer the phone and deal with this, this huge apparent increase in demand through the telephone for our services. But our response for me has been a little bureaucratic and a tendency to record things accurately, but intervene badly. Now, we've got to reverse that trend. And this is our great opportunity, I believe, to do that. So we'll be doing that over the coming months. We are proud of our heritage, but we don't want to keep our older buildings that the public don't need and don't use. But I know there are politicians in the audience, but you will know there is no easy way to close a library, and there is no easy way to close a police station. And yet we find that probably 2 people are now at best will enter some of our buildings for the help that they need. And yet we've still got our buildings in the wrong place. Some of them are very old, some of them aren't fit for IT, but to actually move these things on is a great challenge. But it's one of the benefits of the Deputy Mayor that we have now, that he's prepared to take on that discussion, that debate, and move it forward. Because otherwise we'll be trapped for the next 200 years with the same buildings in the same place, delivering a poorer service than the public need. And frankly, so do our staff. Because some of our buildings are so poor that the investment that needs to go into them is not worth it. And yet we need IT that works, we need buildings that you're proud to get the public into, not ones you're embarrassed to let them tour. So I'm afraid public service generally, and the police in particular, have been rather hair-shirtish about the quality of our buildings. There should be no embarrassment about making good quality working accommodation that both the police and the staff and also the public have a right to deserve and can enjoy to deliver a great service. We have just under 1 million square feet of accommodation in London. We could probably survive with about 2/3 of that, but we'll need to reorganise ourselves and get better investment in the place that we need to most invest. Since I joined as Commissioner, I've instigated a number of things I hope to make me personally more accessible to the public. We have monthly roadshows where I go to a different borough every 4 weeks. You can't get around 32 boroughs in a year, you'll have worked out. But you can do your best. And even if it takes 3 years to get around all of them, and with various ways we might get around them a bit quicker, then we're going to do that. We have web chats, we have videos that we publish on the intranet, and we have Twitter sessions where people can access too. It's a bit superficial in one sense. 8.1 million people can't get through on the Twitter, but even if you can ask, you get 50 people through, they may ask the question that someone else wanted to ask. In any case, your explanation may persuade someone, and you usually get that question asked in one format or another. And to me, it seems to make yourself accessible and accountable is very, very important. Across the Met, we're using technology to connect better. All the boroughs have local Twitter accounts, and many of my colleagues are holding their own web chats. So again, for a massive city, an opportunity for people to get through to the top in that area and ask questions, excuse me, where either people are persuaded by the answers or alternatively it will be left wanting, but at least there's a debate that is published and people can see. Just to highlight how social media is a great way of connecting us to the public, on the 31st of July, 2 of our constables, Jason Campbell and Stephen Rule, jumped into the Thames to rescue a lady who had fallen in the water. That story was posted on the MPS, the Met Facebook page, and within 3 days we had over 1 million hits. 58,000 people liked the story, and over 2,000 comments were made, nearly all favourable. I can't imagine what the negative would be in that respect, but I don't know. But I suppose all we're saying is one of the things we challenged about was, well, why don't you get some more of the good news stories out? Well, frankly, again, the media are interested. I know some of them are here today. It's a bit of a challenge. But either way, it's our responsibility too, what we can do to get good news stories out there. I can't guarantee that the 1 million hits were all from London. They might be from Los Angeles, I don't know. But it is a great opportunity to engage within this country about 60 million people, or in this city possibly up to around 10, depending on how we count them. So I suppose the overall point is that we can't expect people to come to us all the time. We've got to make our effort to get out and engage with them in whatever forum they find the most attractive. I mentioned about total victim care. Well, we think we need to get it right with victims the first time rather than taking many times. It's just one of the ways we think we'll better connect with the public. That's important when about 8% of Londoners were victims of reported crime in London in 2011-12. About 800,000 crimes were reported during that year. So earlier this year, we promised visits to every victim of crime that wanted one. And you may say, well, actually, is that impossible? 800,000 crimes, how can you possibly do that? If you actually work it out, 30,000 cops divides into 800,000 crimes. It's less than one a week per person. Now, of course, the 30,000 are not here all the time. Excuse me. They're not all dedicated to territorial policing. But it isn't 2,000 crimes per person per day. There's a possibility that we can deliver on that promise, and we have. Because not all victims want us to attend. Some do, and we go with the victim's needs. And if they want us to go, then we'll go. And that led immediately in the first few weeks to about 5,000 more face-to-face contacts, where we went to the victims, particularly vehicle crime. Crimes we'd just not been visiting before. It depends on your view of vehicle crime. Vehicle crime is really hard to detect, and we have very low percentage of detection, often because nobody saw the crime happen, or there is no forensic retrieval at the scene. Well, I can guarantee you get no forensic retrieval if you don't visit the scene. And if we're not careful, we just ignore that type of crime at our peril. Not least of which is, of course, the car criminal is also a burglar. On another day, they'll assault you. On another day, they'll do something else. These have not got 1960s demarcation in their crime types. There's some who specialise a little, but people with a criminal motivation will seek whatever opportunity is delivered. So there is an opportunity, if we take it, to make sure we provide a great victim care and we do something about arresting people who commit these crimes, if it's at all possible. Engaging with the wider public, our force doesn't just stop with victims. We must be more responsive and find innovative ways engaging with the general public. Last summer, we saw what can happen if we get this wrong. This summer, we saw what happens when we get it right. It's already been alluded to about the Jubilee, the Paralympics and the Olympics. I thought we saw the best of British policing. Not only the Met, we also saw visitors from Newcastle, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Well, actually, sorry, not Northern Ireland. But every other part of the United Kingdom, we had officers here. They enjoyed it. I was just saying before we came in, if we could arrange it again next year, they'd all come back. As I think as Catherine was saying, do you mean we arrange the Olympics? Well, not we arrange the Olympics, but I think we were wondering whether or not there is an opportunity to send our people elsewhere and possibly get a few in every year. But it was a great event. And it shows that when we, as a British Police Service, get on the front foot, are professional, pleasant, engaging, with a crowd, to be fair, who wanted to be engaged with and were there to enjoy the event. And it's not always that straightforward if you're policing a football crowd or some of the other things that we have to do from time to time. But I think it actually reminded some police officers, and I'll include all of us in this, is that the opportunity to get out there and engage with the public, be on the front foot, be professional, and take the risk that someone rejects you. And no matter who you are in any walk of life, the risk of rejection is quite a difficult thing to deal with. But I think it reminded us a great deal of some of the great things that makes policing strong in this country, an unarmed service, which survives only in that respect because of the support of the general public. In the Met, I think we've got a huge group of volunteers. And people don't always understand that there are people who are prepared to give their own time and efforts to help the people of London. We have an MPS volunteer scheme, over 1,500 volunteers. We have a special constable cohort of over 5,000 and growing. We have volunteer police cadets, over 1,200 young people between 14 and 18 years old. Sometimes people often think these people are selected because they're the good kids who are going to have great careers. We actually pick the people who are vulnerable to getting involved in crime. Not necessarily the ones who commit a crime, but the ones who are vulnerable to getting involved through family relationships or other reasons. So we do our best to help them have a better start through life. We think that these groups give a strong link between the community and the Met. These are individuals who actually help us day by day, and of course their families and friends are affected by the relationship with us too. We have independent advisory groups and citizen panels. We have more than 11,000 individuals who help in providing views and advice on a regular basis, although I think one of the reflections on the riots of last year is that probably we could get better at moving these people through and making sure that they truly represent all the community now as opposed to possibly a few years ago. We're doing work around gangs. And we've got huge numbers of charities and volunteer groups who are helping us with the gangs, and perhaps on question I may probably explain a little more about what we're doing about gangs. But in the first 6 months, our new Trident Gang Crime Command, we arrested over 2,000 gang members, and knife injuries involving those people, certainly under the age of 25, has reduced by about 27%. But it will not just be about enforcement, it will be about engagement with the community, about diversion. Because all the research shows, if all we do is enforce the law, we will not succeed. We have to enforce and also divert. We said we want to be totally professional, and we regard that all that I've talked about will not work unless we're professional in the way we fight crime and professional in the way that we engage with the public. We'll only be properly connected with the public when they know we're on their side, and we'll always show them respect and fairness. I know that one of the themes of today is about police and crime commissioners, and of course in the Met we've had an arrangement in place since January the 17th of this year where the police authority disappeared and a new deputy mayor was appointed. That deputy mayor remained there until May the 4th when the same mayor was elected, but a new deputy mayor arrived. So although we've had an experience of it since January, I would argue it's actually been still quite in a fluid, mobile state. So I'm not sure we are fully aware yet of how it will work out. But I thought we'd just share a little about what our experience of it is to date. We do know that police and crime commissioners have an important role in holding the public to account and connecting us to the public. But that's accountability to one person rather than a police authority of over 20 members. I think no matter how good the individual is, I think that's quite a hard task, particularly in a place the size of London, but not only in London. And I think no matter how small the community, some of our smaller, bigger forces by geography have got some of the smallest numbers of communities. And that imposes its own challenges too. So I think that's quite a challenge for whoever has those roles, even though they have the electoral legitimacy of having been elected into the role at one point in time during a 4-year period. We have a good, strong working relationship with our mayor and also with our deputy mayor, and we're working to achieve shared goals for Londoners, which is essentially to make the place safer. We had our first MOPAC, which is the term we use for the deputy mayor, challenge panel last week. The Mayor and I agreed targets for the Met of cutting 7 neighbourhood crime types by 20%, cutting costs by 20% and increasing public confidence by 20% over the next 4 years. So that's something that's both going to then be kept account of over the next quarters, over the next 5 to 7 years. These reflect the 3 elements of total policing that I laid out to my officers and staff and public when I joined the Met last year. So it's not a new ambition, it is a joined and shared ambition. The Police and Crime Commissioner is here to rightly hold me to account, and I support anything that holds the police to account through public accountability. So I will never reject any question, or I should be able to answer a question. I certainly should stand any inquiry. If people don't like the answer, they have to make that judgment. But they should have the right, in my view, to hold me to account, and therefore the Metropolitan Police in a public place. It seems to me that both the police and the PCCs will be asked to show that what they're doing for the public, and particularly how they use the resources and the taxpayer is given the best value for money. So it's not only the police, but also the Deputy Mayor and the PCCs around the country will have that need. It seems to me the PCCs do have a role in helping us to inform communities about the changes that are taking place for the police. And Stephen Greenhouse, our Deputy Mayor, has made, in my view, a really good point. He's talked about his vision not just of making the MPS the best police service in the world, but the most loved police service in the world. Now, that's sort of language that sometimes for police officers is a little hard to hear, but he's got a point. And it may not be a point that we would have made for ourselves, but the more that I've talked to people in London and those who represent them, the more it's had a resonance, which I think we would be wise to understand and actually make sure that we do something about. There's also the relationship with the scrutiny panel. Now, the scrutiny panel in London is made up from the Greater London Assembly, a body that doesn't exist in the rest of the country. So that's a dynamic that we don't see elsewhere. And I think one of the things that both here in London and I suspect in the rest of the country is to decide, well, who's responsible for what between those two bodies, between the PCC and between the scrutiny panel. The legislation is fairly narrow in its definition of the powers. It talks about vetoes in terms of selection of a chief officer. It talks about vetoes around the budget. But it's silent for the management of the organisation over the rest of the year. And it seems to me how that works out is going to be important. I suspect it will grow in different ways in different places. If you have a similar political dimension to the PCC, As to the scrutiny panel, as we will in some areas, I suspect it will be a different nature. If they're antagonistic, I suspect again it will be different. So how that will work out over the coming years, I think will be very, I think interesting is a word. But of course the police could end up getting caught in the middle of that discussion. And that could be quite public. And as yet, I think even here in London, we haven't seen great clarity about how that relationship will develop in the future. But I think we do need to settle on an adult way forward to make sure that the police aren't caught in any conflict between these two powerful bodies that have a very important role on behalf of the public to make sure that the police develop in the right way. So finally, in conclusion, just to reiterate what I was saying at the beginning of this talk, the challenge of crime never stops changing, just like London and the world we live in. And this is a great city, one of the world's great cities, but it continues to change. So we're changing too. We're trying to be smarter, faster and more accessible, finding new ways to give the public the service it deserves. We call it total policing. We use all our resources, our legal powers, our courage and our flexibility to fulfil our commitment to Londoners to be the best police force. Our vision is of safer neighbourhoods where we come to people when they need us, delivered by more police constables than London has ever had before. It's to offer the public a quality of service and treatment in person, on the phone and online, and a vision where we take pride in our performance and where a police crime commissioner and the public hold us to account, but also help us to achieve our aims. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for taking the time to listen. Thanks very much.